Welcome to God's Transforming Word. We continue our lesson today on the fundamental doctrines, God's building stones. Today's lesson is giving, the truth about tithing. So let's get started with today's study on giving. What does the Bible say about giving? Is tithing for today, or was it just the Old Testament? Let's look at the Old Testament to see how tithing was in place in the Old Testament. Reading in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 5 through 7. But unto the place which the Lord your God shall choose out of all your tribes to put his name, thither, even unto his habitation, shall he seek, and thither thou shalt come, and thither he shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices and your tithes, and heave offerings of your hands, and your vows and your freewill offerings, and the firstlings of your herds and of your flocks. And thither he shall eat before the Lord your God, and he shall rejoice, and all that he shall put your hand unto, and he and your household wherein the Lord thy God have blessed thee. So we see from Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 5 through 7, that God had a place. We were to come to his place, and there we and our family were to eat before the Lord the offerings and bring these offerings before the Lord. And in Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 1 through 4, we see the first of all thy fruits. Reading, And it shall be, when thou art come in unto thy land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance, and possess it, and dwelleth therein, that thou shalt take of thy first of thy fruit of thy earth, which thou shalt bring of thy land, that thy Lord thy God giveth thee, and shall put it in a basket, and shall go unto the place which the Lord thy God shall choose to place his name there. And thou shalt go unto the priest that shall be in those days, and say unto him, I profess this day unto the Lord thy God, that I am come unto the country which the Lord sware unto our fathers for to give us. And the priest shall take the basket out of thy hand, and set it down before the altar of the Lord thy God. First fruits given from the harvest express gratitude to God for his provision in providing the land and the harvest. This same spirit was expressed in the giving of the tithe and in the declaring to the priest that God's law has been honored. First fruits was not 10% off the top of the harvest, but was the first part of the crop that ripened first. You still had the whole field yet to ripen and be harvested. First fruits of your harvest. Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 1 through 4. In summary, it says, that thou shalt take of the first of all thy fruit of the earth. And in Exodus chapter 34, verse 26, the first of the first fruits of thy land thou shalt bring unto the house of the Lord thy God. And in Leviticus 23, verse 10, speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when he be come into the land which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof, then he shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest. Reading Leviticus chapter 2, verse 14 in the New Living Translation. If you present a grain offering to the Lord from the first portion of your harvest, bring kernels of new grain that have been roasted on a fire. In Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 2 in the New Living Translation. Put some of the first products from each harvest into a basket and bring it to the place the Lord your God shall choose for his name to be honored. And in Deuteronomy 26, verse 10 in the New Living Translation. And now, O Lord, I have brought you a token of the first crops of harvest given me from the ground. Then place the product before the Lord your God and worship him. And in Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 10. And now, behold, I have brought the first fruits of the land which thou, O Lord, hast given me, and thou shalt set it before the Lord thy God, and worship before the Lord thy God. The New Ugler's Bible Dictionary on first fruits. In general, first fruits included those in the raw state, grain and fruits, those prepared for use as food, wine, oil, flour, and dough, including wool, etc. The firstling's sheaf at Passover, see festivals, was presented by the congregation before the commencement of the grain harvest. Josephus says that the sheaf was of barley, and that until the ceremony had been performed, no harvest work was to be done. The firstling's loaf at Pentecost was presented when the harvest was complete. 2 of these loaves made of new flour, wheat, and leavened like the sheaves above mentioned were waved before the Lord. Offering of the first fruits. Regarding the firstlings, see discussions of Passover and Pentecost in the article Festivals. Okay. No private offering of the first fruits were allowed before the public observation of the 2 loaves. The law nowhere specified the amount that was to be given in the shape of offerings of this kind, but leaves it to each individual's discretion. It only provided that the choicest portions was always to be offered. In the Holman's Bible Dictionary, first fruits, the choice examples of a crop harvest, first and dedicated to God. In accordance with Mosaic law, individual Israels brought to the house of the Lord the first, that is, the best of the first fruits of the land, including grain, wine, oil, which were used, except for the grain, for the support of the priest. According to Deuteronomy 26, verse 1 through 11, the offering was brought in a basket to the sanctuary for presentation. The book of Proverbs promises prosperity to those who honor the Lord with first fruits. Christ is the first fruits of the resurrection. Reading Ephesians chapter 5, verse 9 and 10. For the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. 1 Corinthians 15:20. But now is Christ risen from the dead, and become the first fruits of them that sleep. The order of the resurrection begins with Christ, followed by believers at the time of his coming back. Christ's resurrection, the first fruits of the new covenant, is God's guarantee that his followers will rise too. You will notice it does not say first fruit, but first fruits. That is because when Jesus raised from the dead, many others that had died rose from the dead also, making up the first fruits. Matthew chapter 27, verse 52 and 53. And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose. We are a kind of first fruits. James chapter 1, verse 18. That we should be a kind of first fruits of His creatures. Romans chapter 16, verse 5. Salute my well-beloved Epaphroditus, who is the first fruits of Achan unto Christ. The Spirit is the first fruits of heaven. Romans chapter 8, verse 23. And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit. And in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 13 and 14. After that he believed, he was sealed with the Holy Spirit of promise. The gift of the Spirit to believers is an event in the present which foreshadows the future union of God and His people in eternity. What is the tithe, and who gets the tithe? The word tithe means a tenth. Abraham presented the tenth of the spoil of his victory to Melchizedek in Genesis chapter 14, verse 20, and Hebrews chapter 7, verse 2. Jacob, after his vision at Luz, devoted a tenth of all his property to God, providing that he should return home safe. Genesis chapter 28, verse 22. Deuteronomy chapter 14 is the tithe law, or the eating law. Thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed. Reading in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 22 through 27. Thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed, that thy field brings forth year by year. And thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God in the place which He shall choose to place His name there. The tithe of thy corn, and of thy wine, and of thy oil, and of thy firstlings of thy herds, and of thy flocks, that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always. And if the way be too long for thee, so that thou art not able to carry it, or if the place be too far from thee, which the Lord thy God shall choose to set His name there, when the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, then shalt thou turn it into money, and bring up the money in thy hand, and shall go unto the place which the Lord thy God shall choose. And thou shalt bestow that money for whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, for ox, for sheep, or for wine, or for strong drink, or for whatsoever thy soul desires. And thou shalt eat there before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt rejoice, thou and thy household, and thy Levites that is within thy gates. Thou shalt not forsake him, for he hath no part nor inheritance with thee. God required His people to tithe of their grain and animal products, all the increase of thy seed, corn, wine, oil, and firstlings of thy animals. When the designated place for giving the tithe was too great of a distance away, then they were permitted to exchange their gifts for money and take it instead, and then buy what they desired to eat at the temple. Tithing provided the worshippers a means of spiritual celebration in supporting the priest and caring for the needy, that thou may learn to fear the Lord thy God. The end of 3 years, the tithe of charity. Charity, or Christian love, almsgiving. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 27 through 29. And the Levite that is within thy gate, thou shalt not forsake him, for he hath no part nor inheritance with thee. At the end of 3 years thou shalt bring forth all thy tithe of thy increase the same year, and shalt lay it up within thy gates. And the Levite, because he have no part nor inheritance with thee, and the stranger, and the fatherless, and widows, which are within thy gates, shall come and shall eat and be satisfied, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all thy works of thy hands which thou does. The Hebrews were to give every third tithe to help the poor, needy, aliens, widows, orphans, and the Levites. It was to be laid up within their local gate. We must be willing to share our resources to provide the needs of the poor and needy. The Levites were mentioned at the giving of all tithes, that we do not forsake him. Why? He has no part nor inheritance. So who gets the tithe? According to the scriptures we just read, the Levites, strangers, fatherless, widows, and you. Thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 22 and 23. Thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed that thy field brings forth, year by year. And thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose to place his name. There the tithe of thy corn, thy wine, and of thy oil, and thy firstlings of thy herds and thy flocks, that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God. So here we see in Deuteronomy 14 that we must tithe all the increase of our seed and bring it year by year. Why? That thou mayest eat before the Lord thy God, and that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always. And in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 27, in the Levite that is within thy gates, thou shalt not forsake him, for he has no part nor inheritance. If we understand giving in the Old Testament, we would understand the Lord's Supper, church service, which are called breaking of bread in the New Testament. Acts chapter 2, verse 41 through 42, and verse 46 through 47. They continued daily with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, and did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. What about now when the church gets the entire tithe? And they say if you are not giving, you are cursed by God. Let's take a look at that. Numbers chapter 18, verse 21 says, I have given the children of Levi all the tenth in Israel for an inheritance. Does not that verse say that pastors of the church get the tithe? Let me explain by first asking another question. Does that verse contradict Deuteronomy chapter 14? Deuteronomy chapter 14 says that the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widows, and you get the tithe for use in fellowship and worshiping of God, and warns not to forsake the ministers. We need to realize that we cannot take a verse by itself and make it doctrine. For the Lord warns in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 16, not to wrest the scriptures or twist them and pull them out of context. The word wrest means to pull or twist. In other words, we cannot take the scripture out of context. If we read on down in Numbers chapter 18, we will be able to see more clearly. But most do not read on down. But let's read that, Numbers chapter 18, verse 21 through 26. And behold, I have given the children of Levite all the tenth in Israel for an inheritance, for their service which they serve, even the service of the tabernacle of the congregation. Neither must the children of Israel henceforth come nigh the tabernacle of the congregation, lest they bear sin and die. But the Levites shall do the service of the tabernacle of the congregation, and they shall bear their iniquities. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, that among the children of Israel they have no inheritance. But the tithe of the children of Israel, which they offer as a heave offering unto the Lord, I have given to the Levites to inherit. Therefore I have said unto them among the children of Israel, they shall have no inheritance. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Thus speak unto the Levites, and say unto them, when he take of the children of Israel the tithes which I have given you from them for your inheritance, then he shall offer up a heave offering of it for the Lord, even a tenth part of the tithe. We see in this passage, but the tithes of the children of Israel, which they offer as a heave offering unto the Lord, I have given to the Levites to inherit. So what is a heave offering? Let's look at the Holman's Bible Dictionary. Heave offering in Exodus chapter 29, verse 27 and 28. The portion of the offering of sacrifice that was set apart and reserved for Yahweh and for the priest. The priests were to eat their portion of the offering of the people in a clean place. So we can see the heave offering simply means an offering, a present including all the offering made by the Israelites as a present made to the tabernacle or temple for the use of the priest, to lift, that is, to set apart for special purposes from a larger quantity. Numbers chapter 18, verse 19. All the heave offerings of the holy things which the children of Israel offer. So we can see that the part of the tithe that was given to the priest was called a heave offering. It was not necessarily all the tithe, but a part of it. Deuteronomy chapter 14 is giving the instructions for the children of Israel, where Numbers chapter 18 is giving the instructions for the priest. When we look at Deuteronomy chapter 14, we see that they were to bring their tithes to Jerusalem. And if the way was too far to carry the tithe, they could exchange it for money and then spend it on anything that they chose when they came to Jerusalem. And then they were to eat it before the Lord in the house of God and share it with others, and not to forsake the Levites or the priests, the leaders. The tithe is to be used in worship and in celebration of God. God warns us not to forsake the Levite, to give him some of your tithe, and to give all your tithe in the third year to the needy and the Levites that were in the local gates. This was the law of the tithe. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 27. And the Levite that is within thy gate, thou shalt not forsake him. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 9 through 11. Thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. And in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 17 and 18. Let the elders that rule well be counted worthy of double honor, And in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 1 through 5, the priest, the Levites, and all the tribe of Israel shall have no part nor inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the offerings of the Lord made by fire, and his inheritance. Therefore shall they have no inheritance among their brethren. The Lord is their inheritance, as he hath said unto them. And this shall be the priest's dues from the people, from them that offer a sacrifice, whether it be ox or sheep, and they shall give unto the priest the shoulders, and the 2 cheeks, and the mallow. The first fruits also of the corn, of the wine, and of thy oil, and of thy firstlings of thy fleece, of thy sheep, shalt thou give him. For the Lord thy God hath chosen him out of all thy tribes to stand to minister in the name of the Lord. The priests were supported by the 12 tribes of Israel, since priests were without land for an inheritance. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 17 through 18, we read, Let the elders that rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially they who labor in the word and doctrine. For the Scripture says, Thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn, and the laborer is worthy of his reward. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 9 through 15. For it is written in the law of Moses, Thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. Does God take care for oxen? Or says he it altogether for our sake? For our sake, no doubt, this is written, that he that ploweth should plow in hope, and that he that thresheth in hope should also be partaker of the hope. If we have sown unto you spiritual things, is it a great thing if we shall reap your carnal things? If others be partakers of this power over you, are not we rather? Nevertheless, we have not used this power, but suffer all things, lest we should hinder the gospel of Christ.